Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. The show is about
Welcome to the Podcast.
on this episode.
Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Bucklesberry Lemonade. This episode is going to be a little different. Normally, we do cover a lot of true crime, some paranormal things, cryptids, and different little things. I know this will fit into the supernatural realm of things. It's just a little different than what we normally would touch on. And let me just say from the start, you don't have to believe the account I'm getting ready to share. That's completely up to you. I am having a hard time wrapping around it myself. However, um, I've grown up with these people. Okay, so for them to share this with me, I have to say, knowing them, I believe it. I believe this. I want to believe it, and we all know that as Christians, there's an evil in this world, and I'm gonna share an account that was shared with me, and I hope you take some value out of it, and I hope it helps you on some level. But anyway, she was wanting to share this story with me as we'd all got together. My friend had came to visit, and his mom came with me. Like with him, like I said, we've known each other forever, and they don't live around here. But she, I tried to get her to come on the show, and she just flat out refused for her own reasons, and I understand. I asked her, could I share this story? And she said I could, as long as I didn't mention any names or places that could cause anyone to connect the dots back to her. And she was just hoping that maybe her brother's story could serve as a warning for others. So I'm gonna break this down from memory as best that I can. So here goes. Her brother passed away a few years ago, and for the most part, he had led a very dark and troubled life. He was in and out of prison, one thing or another, theft, assault, drugs. But years ago, he got right with God. He turned himself around. He started living a very low key life. Um, just from all accounts, turned everything around. Basically, by the grace of God, became a whole new person. On his deathbed, he wanted to tell my buddy's mom a few things. I guess he just wanted to get it off his chest. And this is the story that she wanted to share with me. Okay. She knew he had dabbled in Satanism when he was younger, but she didn't know to what extent. And it turns out it was more than just a dabble. Okay. This all took place in the 70s. He'd been in and out of prison. He was trying to make a change. He came over to her house with a woman, and my buddy's mom, who's been a Christian as long as I can remember, she stated she immediately got a bad feeling about this woman. And this woman, within seconds of being inside the house, made up an excuse about not feeling well, and went to the car. My buddy's mom said they left as quick as they came. It's like a bell went off in his head, and he just excused himself, and they left. And this is the first time my buddy's mom had met her. And not long after this, my buddy's mom got really sick, and she ended up in the hospital. Church folks came over and prayed over her, and she went home. Then the church came over and anointed the house with oil and prayed over each room. And both of us have grown up Pentecostal, so this was a normal occurrence. We were not seeing anything out of the ordinary. Okay, we saw this. It wasn't until later that we learned the my buddy's mom was sensing something, and so she wanted the church to come and anoint her in the house. Later, on her brother's deathbed, she found out as he was dying, her girlfriend immediately after meeting her, tried to curse her, and it didn't work. And that, thankfully, for the blood of Jesus, but the curse didn't work. And she found that out as he was dying. Sorry, guys, I meant his girlfriend. And I, looking back on that now, we talked about this at that time. We really believe my friend's mom, through discernment, through the gift of discernment, was picking up on what this woman was about. And this woman was picking up what my friend's mom was all about. So immediately you have a good and evil that have clashed. And I think the brother, his girlfriend, sensed that she was in a place that she couldn't do much about it. You know, she for all intent purposes had came in, um, and realized, I've got to get out of here. And I think um, my friend's mom, uh, through the Holy Spirit, realized, you you know, you're filled with an evil, you know. And I think that's what happened. And I think that's why she excused herself and went to the car. But like I said, she was told later on her brother's deathbed that this woman had tried to curse her, and obviously it didn't work. But through discernment, she wanted the church to come over and anoint her and pray over the house where two or more are gathered. And that's what happened. And she, meaning my friend's mom, began to immediately pray harder for her brother. And over time, um, you could start to see that her brother began to lose weight. He started to get circles under his eyes. He began to look like he was tired all the time. And this woman had a huge effect on him, almost like he was in a zombie like state a lot of times, and that he had not much of a free will of his own, and that whatever she told him to do, he was Johnny on the spot, ready to do it. And so my friend's mom began to pray harder for her brother. I only had one interaction with my friend's uncle that I can really recall. I had spent the night with him and my buddy because his mom had promised us to take us to the movies, and it was a double feature. We were going to go see Godzilla and Infoman, and I man, I was so excited over that. I mean, it's just going to be an awesome time. Well, on the way over, she decides that she's going to run by her brother's house, and so that's what we do. And when we get there, you you could feel the tension in the air. I mean, you could cut it with a knife. Now, the uncle, my buddy's uncle, her his mom's brother, redundant, I know. Um, he is very pleased to see all of us. Okay, and anyway, they move into the kitchen to have some kind of conversation, and we're left out. Well, I had noticed when we went into the house that in the corner was this a, a wood carving, and it had owls on it, but it had faces on it, and these faces looked like they were in just a state of pain. I mean, or something. I mean, it's just horrible looking, and it gave me the heebie-jeebies. It gave my friend the heebie-jeebies, and it's like you could feel. Looking back on it, it's like you could feel this dark energy coming off of it, and we didn't want to have anything to do with it. And when we got there, um, I had to use the bathroom, so we was told where the bathroom was at, and my friend's brother's girlfriend. So hard not mentioning names, guys. I'm sorry. It's she tells me where the bathroom is, and then she smirks at me and says, but the room across from the bathroom is locked, and you will never be able to go into that door. We learned later, or I learned later, just as my friend and his mom did on the deathbed when he was making his confessions, she kept that room locked. And that is where she would practice her black magic. And so that door was locked. And I can remember using the bathroom, coming out, being a little curious. I mean, you've just told a kid, don't go near that room, okay? And so I didn't try to go in there, but I can remember that same feeling that I was feeling from that statue with the owls and these these faces that looked like they were in pain. I can remember feeling that from that room. Okay. And so we come back in, and we can hear them in the kitchen, and they're getting loud. Okay. And my friend nudges me and he said, "Hey man, what kind of game is this?" And we look over on the coffee table, and not knowing what this was, we knew what it was later in life. This was a Ouija board. Okay. And it's just really strange. And there were cards there, and we found out later in life that those were tarot cards as well. And so we're looking at this game, and my friend's uncle comes out, and he sees us over by the Ouija board, and he says, don't touch that. Okay. um, don't touch it. You can't play with that." And my friend was like, "Well, come on, uncle, can we just..." "No, you can't play with this. You do not need to touch this." Well, at this point in time, the girlfriend and my friend's mom are coming out of the kitchen, and she sees us over by the Ouija board, and she hears him telling us we can't play with it, and she laughs, and she gives off this laugh. I'll never forget it. It's like you could feel it vibrate through you, you know. um it was so strange. It's like that laugh came from somewhere else. And she said, "No, go ahead, let them play with it." And like I told you earlier, this is one of those things to where normally whatever she told him to do, he did. But for whatever reason, he looked her dead in her face, in her eyes, angrily looked at her and said, "I said no." And then he turned back around and he looked at me and my buddy, and he said, "Whatever you do in your lifetime, never have anything to do with these cards or with this type Ouija board or board game," or whatever he said, how he said it. But he said, "It is not a game, and you should never play with anything like this." And at this point, my friend's mom, she's herding us out of the house. It's time to go. Okay. And what we learned later on, and at that time, whatever you say, whatever you guys want us to do, because we weren't making anybody mad, we had to get this double feature. Okay. Infoman and Godzilla were calling. All right. And we learned later, as she was telling all this story, his confessions and everything, we learned later she'd went over just to ask if she could pray with them and for them, and the girlfriend became angry over it. And so we left and went on about our way, and just really never thought anything about it. And so as he's on his deathbed, his sister, my buddy's mom, asked him, said, "Well, you know, how high ranking were you in this thing?" And he said he never was really high ranking at all, that he was considered more or less like a little foot soldier. But this woman that he was seeing was considered almost like a high priestess of some type in this coven. And he explained to her that it was far reaching and it had been around a long time. He said, the brother claimed, that this coven was tied to Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, who was a known Satanist. the Son of Sam, and the Zodiac Killer. And the reason Richard Ramirez was caught is it was time for him to be caught. And it was almost like it was his time for the world to know, hey, I'm Richard Ramirez and I'm a Satanist, and it was his time. The Zodiac, we were told, as well as the Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, that the reason you had so many conflicting stories when people were trying to identify these two was that it was never the same person. That they were all involved in these satanic rituals and covenants, and that it was always someone different. And even David Berkowitz has allured to something along those lines, that he had ties with a covenant. And of course, the Zodiac, and doing your own research to that, he's described in 1 minute as tall and slender, 1 minute as short and stocky. So you really don't know. But he was telling us this, and he said that's how far reaching this covenant was, that they had ties all across the United States, and that they went back a long way. So this wasn't just something new, part of the satanic panic that we grew up in, but that this was a real thing, and that this was happening. And so we left, went to the movies. Everything was normal. I never was back over at his house, the uncle's house, again, my buddy's uncle. Never had any more interaction with him. Never saw him again. And he had told her on his deathbed he had disappeared for a few years and was just gone. And he said that during this time, his girlfriend was growing in power. And he'd made the comment that they had been to a few parties, and one of the parties that he had went to was where in the town that we grew up in. I'm not going to say a whole lot about it, because if I let loose too much, some of you who listen to our show that we know that are local, you will put it together. You will know exactly the place that I'm talking about. But he said at this party, it was the first party that he'd been to like this, and he said that it started off as a normal party, but as the night progressed, things seemed to get darker and darker. And he said, he'd been drinking heavily, using drugs and things like that. But he said all of a sudden he started to see people in black robes. He noticed that there was a couple of rooms in this house that had pentagrams drawn on the floor, and that some of these people in these black robes were telling him things about his life that they shouldn't have known. There was no way that they would have known these things. And some of these things he'd never revealed to his girlfriend, but yet these people knew these things. And he said toward the end of the night, he literally was seeing people flying in the air. And the my buddy's mom asked, "You mean like levitate, just kind of float?" He said, "No, I actually was seeing these people float in the air, up in the air, flying." Okay, like Superman. I mean, that's the only way that we could all wrap around it. And that he he attended the party. He was freaked out by it, but he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Well, that's pretty damn out of the ordinary, isn't it? But he said he didn't see anybody hurt or anything along those lines, and that he wasn't comfortable at all. But he went because of his girlfriend. And later on his deathbed, as he's explaining this to his sister, he felt like he was being tested to see how he would interact with these things, to see if he would run away or if he would hold his ground. And it could have also been a test to see his high priestess girlfriend, how much power she had over him. I'm not sure. So anyway, he described going to another party, and this one is weird. He said he goes to this party, but it's not in a house. It's deep out in the woods outside. There's a huge bonfire. It's lit. He's seeing these same people in these black robes. Um, there was a makeshift altar built, and people were everywhere in the woods, and they're having sex and they're using drugs. And he said at this point they brought out a pig. Okay. And they put the pig on the altar, and they all started chanting something. He didn't understand it, but looking back on it, he believes it was Latin. Matter of fact, he knew it was Latin. They stabbed this pig, but the pig didn't squeal. He said it let loose a scream like a woman would scream. He said he literally looked up thinking this was a woman that they just stabbed, and it was the pig that they'd let out and placed on this altar, and it screamed like a woman. And he said he didn't know what to make out of it. He said he was so high, he couldn't tell at this point, maybe I'm hallucinating, maybe I'm not seeing this. And he says they started passing around these goblets, and they each took turns drinking this pig's blood. And they're smearing it all over their bodies and things like this. And he said he only pretended to drink. He said because at this point he felt himself getting sober, and he started to get scared. Okay. And as all this is going on, he said all of a sudden this man just appeared. He appeared out of nowhere, and he's dressed in an all white suit, head to toe, immaculately dressed. And my buddy's uncle said this man was the most handsome man that he'd ever seen. He said he'd never seen anything like it. They're in the woods, they're chanting. There's all kinds of noise going on, and said when this man appeared, it became quiet, whisper quiet. He said there was nothing in the woods making noises. Everyone stopped, and he said he could feel like a cold chill come over his body, like a he said it was like a huge temperature change all of a sudden. And he said all of a sudden, after this happened, people started walking up to him, and they would kneel in front of him and kiss his ring. And they were all doing it. And he said his girlfriend grabbed him by the hand and led him up to this guy. She knelt down, kissed his hand or his ring, and rubbed her face across his hand. And then she told him that he had to do the same. And he said he reached over and he kissed this man's ring. And he said he looks up into the man's eyes, and he had the greenest eyes that he ever had seen in his life. But he said his skin was cold to the touch. He said it felt like touching a dead person, and he could just feel evil coming off of him. And he said he knew right then that he needed to get out of there. So he kissed the guy's ring. And he said the thing that caught him so off guard, besides how green his eyes were, how cold his hands were, and he could feel the evil coming off of him, but when he kissed his ring, he could feel his lips burning. And he looks back up in the guy's face, into his eyes, and now they're not green anymore. They are blood red. And he said he let loose this laugh. And as he's laughing, he could feel it vibrate through his whole body. And he said he felt like this man was starting to change. It's like his skin started to become scaly. He wasn't sure what was going on. He doesn't really remember. He said because either out of being drugged up, drunk, or scared out of his mind, he passed out. And he doesn't remember anything else from that night, except that when he woke up the next morning, he was home. He was in his bed, and his girlfriend was walking around like nothing ever happened. And he said it wasn't long after this she began to teach him things. She began to bring him into this locked room in their house, and she had this black book that she always kept locked up. But now she was allowing him to see this book, and partake of things that she was doing. And he said she taught him how to astral project, how to come out of his body, go out into the night, and look around. And she said this would enable you to know what other people are doing. And this book, he said, was in Latin, and he knew it was a book of black magic. But he said somehow through some kind of spell that she had cast, when they would open the book, it was Latin, but then he would see it begin to change in front of him into English so that it could be read. And he said he never cast any spells, but he did learn how to astral project, and that they would go out into the night and look. And he said that they couldn't stay gone very long at a time. He said she called it a tethering cord, and that they couldn't stay out very long, but they would go out and look into the night. And he said you could see other people in this astral plane around them. He said sometimes they look like demons, just straight out demons. And he said sometimes he would look and he would think he was looking at an angel, you know. And he said he only done this a handful of times and he was never really comfortable doing it, but she enjoyed it. And he said one night that they had went and looked at his sister's house, my buddy's mom, and that she told him, "I'm going to get your sister. I'm going to get her." And I should mention also that she had this black cat, according to him, that was always around. And I do remember during this conversation with my buddies and his mom that she did say from time to time she would look out her window and see a black cat on her windowsill. And looking back on it, she feels like this might have been this woman's familiar, and that this cat was keeping tabs on her as well. But he learned how to astral project and would start going out into the night and looking around. And he learned later why she was wanting him to do this. And the reason he learned she wanted him to be able to do this is that and like I said, if you remember, he was gone for a few years, so it wasn't long after all this that he wasn't around anymore. And my friend's mom just assumed maybe he'd gotten in trouble and went back to jail. But what had happened was the girlfriend, this high priestess, was trying to keep him away from his sister because she knew that there was a lot of prayer going up, and she was trying to keep him away from this, to use him as a foot soldier in this satanic covenant. But he learned later on that part of this astral projection, they would visit churches. And what the goal was, and he learned this, he explained this on his deathbed, that he learned they wanted to go about this covenant and destroy these churches. And so they would do this through several different ways, but the main way that they wanted to do it was just to infiltrate the church and destroy it from the inside out. And they said there were several churches that this took effect and happened at. I don't know where any of these churches are that they did this to, but he told the story that most of the time bigger churches were easier targets because a lot of them, you may only have a handful of true, strong Christians inside those churches, and they would break them down. But he said what happened was they went to this really small church that they had seen one night on these astral travels, and they'd went to this church, and when they went to walk inside this church, it was on a Wednesday night, he said, they couldn't walk in. So there's like this overwhelming force was pushing them back, and they couldn't enter into this church. And his girlfriend became just rabid angry about it. And she told him, she said, we're going to burn this church to the ground. And he said that every time that they tried to touch the doorknob to this church, that it was so hot they couldn't go in. There was nothing they could do. Said they'd go to another door and try to enter into the church, and it's like something was pushing them back. They just couldn't do it. So she decides, this girlfriend, this high priestess, they're going to burn this church down. So he said a few nights later, a bunch of them gathered up, and they all go out there with gas cans, and they form a circle around this church, and they're chanting and praying. And some of them start to cough. It's like they can't get the chant out, whatever, they can't talk. And every time they went to throw gas into the direction of the church, it's like the wind would come up and blow the gas back on them, and they couldn't do it. And for fear of lighting their own selves on fire, in frustration, they gave up and they left. He said around this time, I guess they got to have some way to make money. Okay. He answers a help wanted ad for a lumber yard. And he goes to work in this lumber yard. And a couple days in, he's getting there early because he's wanting to work. And he also made the comment, he was a little uncomfortable when he walked in there, but he said he felt a peace and a calm there. So he really wanted to work there, and he really wanted to do a good job. But he said that one day before work started, before clock in time, he said several of them, including the owner, were talking about this church. And he said that he noticed that they were talking about that when they went out the morning after they tried to set it on fire, that evidently these church folks were going into the church, the pastor and the deacons, and they were noticing gas cans around these gas cans around the church. And he said it was so strange to him. He said, and that all of a sudden the owner of the lumberyard looked at these guys and said, "You know what we need to do, right?" And they said, "Yeah, you're right. We know we need to do what's right." Well, he's expecting these guys to be angry. Okay, like I said, he's expecting them to be angry, and he's thinking, all right, they're going to figure out that we did this, and there's going to be some retaliation, and I'm probably going to lose this job and get hurt in the process. But he said he saw these guys stand up, and they formed a circle, and they held hands, bowed their heads, and began to pray. And he's listening to this, and they weren't praying for retribution or revenge. They were praying for whoever did this for their souls. And he said this shook him to the core as he realized that these people weren't bad. And he'd been told all this time, Christians are evil. They're not what you think they are. They're the enemy. And he sat there and he said he began to feel this stirring inside of him. And he started to question some things. He said, these people are praying for me right now. And he came to realize later on, at that time, he thought they don't know anything about me. And he came to learn later on that the owner, who was the head deacon at this church, sensed something about him. Okay? And that's through discernment, through the Holy Spirit. He sensed something about him. And he said it got to where on lunchtime, sometimes he had food and sometimes he didn't. He said, but the owner would always come around, tell him how good a job he was doing, how much he appreciated him, and would offer him half his lunch if he didn't have lunch. And he said this man was so kind-hearted, and he thought, how can he be evil? I'm being told that, I'm on the good side, and these Christians are evil. But this man is so kind. He's so nice. And he said every time he talked to the guy, that it got to where he wanted to be around him more and more. Okay. And he and his girlfriend began to have more and more trouble with each other. They began to argue a lot more. Um, he could feel her grip on him starting to loosen. And he began to, he said it was almost like his mind began to clear. Okay. And his girlfriend was sensing this, and she wanted him to quit working at the lumber yard, but he refused. And he said he just looked forward to spending more and more time with this man, and that the man would tell him things from the Bible. And he said he was never questioned about anything. He said this guy was always very loving, very understanding, very encouraging. Um, and he just enjoyed spending time with this man and the other men there too as well. And he said these guys had a deep sense of belonging with each other, and he felt that, and he wanted to feel more of it. And he said his girlfriend, this high priestess in this coven, be, like I said, began to feel her chains that wrapped around him, her grasp on him began to loosen. And he said the thing that finished it for him one night is that she invited another girl over to the house, and they went into the room that was always locked. And he was told he couldn't go in. And at this time, he wouldn't go in the room with her much anymore. You know, he didn't want to astral project. He didn't want to do any of that anymore. And he said within himself he was beginning to feel things that he wasn't sure what he was feeling. And we know that this is, you know, God's knocking on his door, on his heart. Jesus is dealing with him through the Holy Spirit at this point. And he says that they go into this room, and he begins to hear them chant, and he can pick up on certain pieces of it, and it dawns on him that they're trying to cast a spell on him. Okay, she's trying to bring him back into the fold. Okay, so he goes outside to look through the window to see what's actually going on. And as he says, he goes outside, okay, and looks through the window, and they're in the middle of uh, this pentagram, and they're nude, and they are cutting themselves, okay, and they're drinking blood, and he sees both of them begin to have relations with each other as they're chanting, and one of them, um, how can I say this correctly? One of them defecates, and they begin to smear this over themselves, and they're chanting, and they begin having relationship relations with each other. Okay, and they're chanting, and he realizes that they're trying to cast some type spell on him, and he says all of a sudden, it's like a mist comes into this room, smoke or mist or something, and it's swirling around. And he can feel that same chill that he felt at that party in the woods that we talked about. And he said, all of a sudden, this man appears in this room, and it's the same man that he saw from the forest. And to this day, in his mind, this was the devil. This was straight on the devil. And he said he had asked her about this one time, and she told him no, that it wasn't the devil, that it was another high ranking member in this coven. So he's not really sure who this person is. He just knows this person has appeared. And as far as he's concerned, this is either the devil or a demon. He knows what he's seeing. And he says this man takes off his clothes and begins to have relations with both of them. And all this filth and abominations, or, the blood, the drinking of the blood, the feces, and all this stuff, and they're pouring hot wax on each other, and it's horrible what he's seeing. And he says that through this window, as he's watching this, he's getting sick to his stomach. And he starts to feel this tugging at his heart again. And he says, all of a sudden, this man looks him in his face through the window, like on cue, and they lock eyes with each other. And he says, this man's eyes are blood red. They're not this green. They've turned red like he saw in the woods. And he knew that he had to get out of there. He's just afraid. And this man begins to laugh at him. This demon, the devil, whatever he's seeing, begins to laugh at him. Okay. And he just takes off. He's running. He's like, I've got to get out of here. I can't do this anymore. I've got to get out of here. And the only thing that he knows to do, he runs to this church, this little small church that his boss man is a deacon of. He runs to this church. And he says, I know that I'll be safe here. They couldn't break the circle. They couldn't breach this church. They couldn't enter into this church. In his mind, he's thinking, I'm so scared at this point. They're going to either bring me back into this covenant, or they're going to kill me. But in his mind, he's thinking, if I can get close enough to this church, like if I'm next to this church, if my body is physically touching this church, I'm going to be okay. They're not going to be able to get me. And then he's thinking, but can I touch this church? I couldn't before, because he talked about the doorknobs being hot and things like that. So he gets to this church and he's crying. He's scared. He's crying for everything he's worth. And as he gets there and he starts running up to this church, he said the door opens and out steps his boss man. And he said, son, come on in. You can come in. And he said, I couldn't before. He said, well, you can now. Come in. He goes in, he shuts the door, and he's sobbing. And the man tells him, said, you tell me what's going on. And he says, my buddy's uncle just breaks down and starts confessing everything to him. He's telling him, I've been involved in this. I was wrong. I should have never gotten to this point. This woman had this hold on me. I've seen these things. And he's sobbing uncontrollably. And he says, this guy, he's expecting him to say, well, you crazy. But this guy puts his arms around him and pulls him to him and hugs him. And he said, it's okay. It's okay. We're going to pray. And he said this man began to pray over him. And it was such a beautiful prayer. And he said he could feel the heaviness start to lift off of him. He could feel the room and the atmosphere start to get lighter. And he said it was like something was washing over him and he was being bathed in this glory, in this light. And he knew at this point that he was wrong. And he said, please, please tell me what I have to do to have what you have. And he said in that moment, the man led him to salvation. And he got right with God. And he felt everything lift off of him. And he said they were praying, and as they walked outside, he looked up into the night sky. And he could see his girlfriend and this other woman and this man and other people. He could see their astral projections in the sky, hovering around this church. And he could see that they were all screaming, no, no, no. And he started to get afraid. And he said that this man took him by the hand. He said, son, you don't have to be afraid. He said, but you're not seeing what I see. And he said, yes, I am. I'm seeing exactly what you're seeing right now. And they're going to go away. And he said, just like that, they were gone, and everything started coming back to normal. He could hear the birds, the crickets, everything in the night. And he said, as he sat there, he told the man, he said, I don't want to leave this place. Can I just sit here? And he said, I'm going to sit with you. And they sat together till the sun rose, and the man talked to him, and and everything. And he invited him into his home, and he began to live with this guy and his family. And the man began to teach him about God and about the Bible and things. And he said this went on for roughly a year. And my friend's mom asked him, said, well, did you have any more interaction with this woman, with this high priestess? And he said, no. After that night, he said, I never saw her again. I never sensed her again. And I never saw the cat. I never saw any of these people again. I didn't go back for my clothing. I left everything there. I just left it and started over. And he said that one of the reasons he stayed gone for so long was, he was afraid this woman might have moved back, and he didn't want any repercussions on his family. And they would pray for his family and everything to be okay. And time began to pass. And on his deathbed, he did say that he did feel her whisper in his ear one time. And he wouldn't say what she said, but she did whisper in his ear one time. And he never heard from her again, and she was gone. And anyway, he over time he started to get sick, and he wanted to come back home and be home. And during that time, he had written his sister several letters, and they were talking on the phone, and she knew he'd become a Christian. And as he was passing away, he took her by the hand, and he said, I just want to tell you how much I love you. Thank you for your prayers. He said, because your prayers led me to that lumber yard and led me to that church. He said, even though I first set foot on that church to do harm, I was led to that church for a reason. I was led to that lumber yard for a reason. And this kind, gentle, elderly man who has looked after me and helped me so much. He said, and it wouldn't have happened if people hadn't been praying for me. He said, thank you so much. And he told her he loved her. He said, but don't worry about me now. He said, as I close my eyes and take my last breath, I know where I'm going. And so soon after he passed, and he died. And now at this point, we're all crying, okay? She shared this story with us, and it's heavy, okay? And we're all crying, and we're all thankful that God has blessed this situation. And like I said, all this happened back in the 70s. He passed away not so long ago, but it's been a few years, okay? Because again, she didn't want people to put the dots together and things like that. And but that's his story, and that's the story that she shared with me. And man, what a story! It's an incredible story. And I'm just so thankful that she chose to share it with me. I wish she would have came on the show, but anyway, it is what it is. Well, guys, we have reached the end of this podcast, and thank you for being with us. We appreciate you guys so very much for listening, and please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.